It was late at night, about 2 a.m., and I'm just guessing, when my grandfather, my mom's dad, slipped out of the house and he drove away. He was due to visit us for a whole week. But on that first day of his visit, I told him that I didn't feel like going golfing. And my brother also told him that he didn't feel like going golfing. You see, golfing was the regular thing that we did with our grandfather, but this was the first visit since he had left our grandmother, and you don't need the details, and we were mad. So we didn't go golfing, and he felt it, our resentment. So he left in the deep of the night. I guess he didn't want to face us anymore, and honestly, I don't know that we wanted to face him anymore either. It would be 10 years until we'd see him again. I don't know when the last time it was that you felt wronged by someone, offended, insulted, really wronged. I'm not talking about getting cut off on 435. I'm talking about someone who really hurt you in some way. And I don't know when is the last time that you hurt someone else. Might have been by accident, might have been on purpose. We return today to this saga of Jacob and Esau, and it's quite a saga, right? After Jacob cons Esau out of his birthright and then his blessing, he goes away for these 20 years, marries, has children, and then God tells him to go home. And he knows that Esau, who had vowed to kill him 20 years ago after he had cheated his older brother out of those birth privileges, he knew that his older brother was coming with 400 men. And these two brothers were finally going to come face to face. You can't escape the role of the face in our scripture today. When Jacob sends these waves of gifts, 3 of them, 3 waves of gifts, he says, I may appease him with the presents that go ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. And then during that night, he has this wrestling match with this stranger that it takes a while to figure out that this is just not any other man, but he's wrestling with the Almighty. And so Jacob called that place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. It's a remarkable thing because you're not supposed to be able to see God's face and live. And there's an incredible passage in Exodus where God is speaking to Moses, and God is going to appear in this extraordinary ceremony of covenant. But he tells Moses, you cannot see my face, for no one shall see me and live. There is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you will see my back. But my face shall not be seen. I think faces have always played a huge role in our life, obviously, right? I might forget a name, but I never forget a face. We use face all the time, the word face all the time when we're talking about relationships. If you really need to connect with someone, to have some quality time with someone, we might say, I need some face time with Christopher. If we're describing a confrontation with someone, we might say, he really got in my face. If there's a challenge that's before us, we'll just say, you just gotta face it. Or if we want to avoid something or someone, I just don't want to face her. The emphasis on face is both ancient and modern, and so it's no wonder that the most popular social media site is Facebook. Our drama between Jacob and Esau is couched in this coming of face to face. In the morning, Jacob sets out ahead from the rest of his family. He's discarded by that way, that one of those strategies we've talked about of separating his family in two groups, so if Esau attacks one, the other will survive. He's gotten rid of that, and Jacob himself is walking out in front. Is this evidence of the new Jacob, the new Israel, after his wrestling with God? And as he sees Esau approaching with 400 men, he drops to the ground and bows 7 times. He is unable initially to come face to face with his brother. And we have absolutely no idea what's in Esau's mind. And, frankly, it's been all about Jacob all the time, right? For the past several chapters. And I'd really like to just maybe change up a little bit and get into Esau's head. But we don't know what he's thinking as he's approaching this encounter. Is he going to take revenge or not? But what we do find is probably one of the most beautiful encounters in all Scripture. Upon seeing Jacob, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. For Esau, we could imagine, I think, the end of 20 years of resentment. The end of 20 years, maybe of self-righteousness. The end of 20 years of anger. The end, maybe, of 20 years of bitterness. For Jacob, we could imagine this is the end of 20 years of guilt. 20 years of fear. And 20 years of exile. In response to this forgiving welcome from his brother, Jacob speaks the words that struck me and obviously struck Debbie the most out of this entire passage that we read, which was, Jacob says, "If I find favor with you, then accept my present from my hand, for truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have received me with such favor." Or perhaps we could paraphrase it this way: to see your face is like seeing the face of God, since you have forgiven me. Jacob and Esau's story reminds me of another story in Scripture. Does it remind you of another story? Of another pair of brothers? Of an older brother and a younger brother, and the younger brother's trying to pull one kind of on the rest of the family, really, and he wants his inheritance now and goes off and blows it and comes back thinking, well, I'm only coming back not as a son, but maybe, hopefully, as a hired hand for my father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. I really wonder if Jesus is thinking about Jacob and Esau as he tells the parable of the prodigal son, which is really a story about the very nature of God in that father. What I wonder is your experience around forgiveness today. Are you personally in need of forgiveness today in some place, some corner of your life? Are you aching to be forgiven? Do you need to forgive someone in your life today? Is there someone who has done something to you and they are locked, stuck? Do they need forgiveness from you? So I'm asking, are you Jacob today, or are you Esau? Or are you a little bit of both? You know, as I think about it, I think there are four parts to forgiveness. There's the offense. You can't really have forgiveness without some transgression, without something that causes hurt and pain. Otherwise, forgiveness doesn't have a whole lot of meaning. But then secondly, there's the seeking of forgiveness. There's the granting of forgiveness. Then there's the accepting of forgiveness. When I lived in Senegal for a few years, I had the most extraordinary experience of forgiveness that I'd ever encountered. The whole village, about 1,000 people, had a festival. And they were going to have this big feast, which was always kind of bizarre, because about half the village was on the edge of severe malnutrition. Then every now and then these feasts would pop up, and people would suddenly eat meat that they hadn't seen for 3 months. So we're about to share in this feast. But before the feast, suddenly I realized something was happening as I saw people going to each other, and everyone, it was like a massive pinball machine. And someone then told me what was going on, and I entered in, but everyone was going to each other and saying, "Balmawai. Gary Balmawai. Bob Balmawai. Carol Balmawai. Balmawai, forgive me." It was a ritual of asking for forgiveness for everyone in that community. Whether you knew that you had wronged them or not, it was kind of behind it a little bit of an assumption that somehow, some way, you needed each person's forgiveness in that village. What would it be like, I wonder, if we asked each other in this place, "Would you forgive me? Jack, would you forgive me? Angela, would you forgive me? Barbara, would you forgive me?" What would it be like if we asked for forgiveness in our own families? Brothers, sisters, daughters, sons, parents, even the extended family. What would it be like if we asked for forgiveness across a whole neighborhood? What would it be like if we asked for forgiveness to everybody in school or in our workplace? What would it be like to ask forgiveness of people who are just the ones that are in relationship with us? You might be thinking, that's kind of nice. It's kind of a picturesque view, isn't it, of the people in this village going around and saying, "Forgive me, forgive me." But forgiveness is much more complicated than that, isn't it? You can't just forgive everything, right? I mean, there's some pretty terrible stuff that goes on, and where's judgment come into all that? Isn't there a role for an angry God? For things being made right? Not just saying that everything's okay? What do we do in the face of evil? That's the topic of my sermon next week as we approach that date that is in our minds, in our history, as December 7th, 1941 was for so many people in front of my generation. As we approach September 11th, what do we do in the face of evil? But for Jacob, seeing the face of Esau was just like seeing the face of God, since Esau had received this forgiveness. And isn't it kind of ironic that here Esau is forgiving Jacob, and in a way, he's providing him a blessing. Jacob stole a blessing 20 years ago, and now Esau is freely giving him another. 10 years passed, and my grandmother was in declining health, so my mom brought her from Cleveland to Baltimore and had her set up in an assisted living facility. And then my mom reached out to my grandfather and invited him to visit. And if my mom had not taken that step, I'm pretty sure that I would never have seen my grandfather again, perhaps at his funeral. And my grandfather accepted that offer of forgiveness from my mom. I lived in Baltimore at the time, and so I came over for that first dinner, which was uneasy. And then my grandfather and I began a new tradition that we would repeat many times over the years, and that is that we played chess. And we would have matches that would last from 3, believe it or not, 4, 5 hours long, deep into the night. And we were face to face. And I think we both felt blessed.